Today we're going to be talking about the iconic story of David and Goliath. We just saw David being anointed king, right? Just last reading, right? So let's jump into it. Let's just go right into it. Chapter 17.
Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet.
Okay, let's see. Okay, 6 cubits and a span. How tall is 6 cubits and a span? I believe it's like 9-10 feet tall, right? So cubits to feet. So 6 cubits would be 8.5, right? So what is a span? I'll just type in 6 cubits and a span. What does 6 cubits and a span mean? Measurement is equivalent to 11.35 feet. Ancient metrics, some ancient texts say that Goliath stood 4 cubits and a span, which Chadwick says equals 4 cubits, while other ancient texts claim that he towered 6 cubits and a span, a measurement equivalent to about... okay, who's Chadwick? So we have two heights, 7.8 and 11.35. Interesting. Yeah, this is the first time I've ever heard about this, right? 4 cubits in a span. What is this? Who are these people? La Vista Church of Christ. The King James Bible reports that the giant Goliath is 6 cubits and a span in height, over 9 feet tall. But the Septuagint, a Greek Bible, also gives Goliath's height as 4 cubits and a span. So by the interpretation, which one is correct? Okay, so my question would be King Og's bed. Right? We saw that was about 14 feet long, right? So is that according to King James? Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure it is, right? Because I'm reading New King James. But what does the Septuagint say about King Og's bed? Let's look that up. I'm just curious. King Og's bed, Septuagint. Come on. Oh, here, iron bed, which allegedly, okay, can still be seen. How big is it though? Let's type in length. Nothing. Size. Nothing. Cubits. Okay. By the common cubit, it's 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Okay, what is that according to? Nine cubits long, 4 cubits wide. That's all they're saying. Okay, why is Septuagint not popping up? I thought that was... Yeah. Right there. Okay. Whoa. Okay, that'll be a cool way to look at it. Okay, so what was the verse for King Og? Deuteronomy 3:11. Deuteronomy 3:11. Septuagint. Brenton Septuagint translation 3:11. Okay, same, 9 cubits. So did 9 cubits in the breadth 4 okay, so the same same thing. All right, so I mean it's still possible that he could be 10, 11 feet tall, right? If Og's bed was 14 feet long, right? You're not going to have a 7-foot person sleeping on a bed 14 feet long, right? So, I mean, you could, but...
On his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders.
This is interesting, right? Because the Philistines could work with iron. The children of Israel couldn't, right? They mainly used bronze, as we learned. So maybe bronze is just easier to work with, and due to the size of Goliath, they decided to go with bronze instead of iron. Which if that's the case, that points to the idea that he was actually on the taller end of the scale regarding the translation.
Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them,
Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together.
When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went, and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Then Jesse said to his son David,
So it could be that David occasionally went and returned from Saul for regarding war matters, not just playing the harp, because we did see that they did reference David as a man of war. So it was not that he was just a little boy who was at home playing the harp, taking care of the sheep, right? He did take part, looked like.
Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them.
Probably not, actually. I don't think he probably is not taking part in this war. But then I'm curious, when did he fight? If they referred to him as a man of war before, so I'm curious as to why they referred to him as that. So when was he fighting?
Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then, as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said,
Have you seen this man who has come up?
Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel.
Then David spoke to the men who stood by him.
What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?
So shall it be done for the man who kills him.
Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David.
Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle.
What have I done now? Is there not a cause?
Then he turned from him toward another, and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul,
Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine.
You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. For you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth.
Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb...
And he...
Okay, let me go back. You are not able to go against a Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But see, then I just found the passage here in chapter 16, right? Where Saul is... where Samuel, right? Oh, no. Then one of these... Where is it? So Saul said to his servants, Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me. Then one of the servants answered and said, Look, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor and a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. So they're referring to David as a mighty man of valor and a man of war. At least that one servant did. Samuel didn't say that when he was anointing David. So, yeah, I don't know. If David has some experience fighting in war, because here it's saying that you are a youth and he is a man of war from his youth, right? So, I don't know. Let me know what your thoughts are down below regarding that. Do you think David actually had some war experience or did he not? And that's this servant of Saul's is mistaken.
Fight with this Philistine.
You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. For you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth.
Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine.
Go, and the Lord be with you.
So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul,
I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them.
So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag, in a
Aerodynamic
pouch which he had,
stones.
and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came, and began drawing near to David. And the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking.
That's
Am
the
I a
description
dog
Samuel
that
gave
you
when he
come
saw.
to me with sticks?
And the Philistine cursed David by his gods.
Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field.
You
Okay,
come to me
Goliath.
with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the
threw his
earth
line
may
right
know
back
that
at
there
him.
is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands.
So
Okay,
it was when
David.
the Philistine arose
Let's
and
go.
came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead. And he fell on
That
his
was
face
fast.
to the earth. So David prevailed
Oh, he fell
over
on his
the
face.
Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shearaim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent.
I'm curious. I'm wondering. That's interesting. Why, like, if Goliath was really like, I don't know how tall, how big his head would have been, right? If he was 14 or 11 feet tall, I mean, I guess not that insanely big. And do you think David could have handled his sword? So I'm just trying to decide, like, is he like 10, 11 feet tall, or was he more in that 7, 8 feet tall range, right? Like, it's interesting. They didn't make note of the size of the sword as David picked it up, or the size of the head as David carried it, right?
Head of the Philistine and
I
brought
just-
it
I guess
to
I just
Jerusalem,
Thought they
but he
would.
put his armor in his tent. When Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army,
Abner, whose son is this youth?
As your soul lives, O king, I do not know.
Inquire whose son this young man is.
Then, as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him,
Whose son are you, young man?
I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite.
Now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house any more. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him
they became
as
like
his own
brothers.
soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David, with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Now it had happened, as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced, and said,
Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s.
Ooh, that's gotta hurt
Then
Saul.
Saul was very
yeah, that's
angry.
gotta hurt Saul.
And the saying displeased him.
They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?
So Saul eyed David
jealous.
from that day forward. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times. But there was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said,
I will pin David to the wall.
But David escaped his presence twice. Now Saul was afraid of David.
David dodged that
because
spear.
the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his presence, and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Therefore, when Saul saw that he behaved very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and
All the
Judah
makings of a king.
loved David,
Saul
because he
seeing it in
went
him.
out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David,
Because Saul knows, right? Samuel already said that. We already, your line is not continuing. We already found our other king. So Saul's like sort of cautious. He's like, oh, is this going to be David now?
Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles.
for Saul thought,
Let my hand not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him.
So David said to
Does that mean like, okay, maybe, I shouldn't, be mean to this guy, right? And I should have his back because, he's got to fight the Philistines. Because if I help him out, he'll help me out. Or is he saying that, I shouldn't be the one to kill him. The Philistines are going to kill him for me. I don't know which one he means.
Saul,
Who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be son-in-law to the king?
But it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Meholathite as a wife.
What? What happened?
Now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David,
Okay,
and they
there we go.
told Saul, and the thing pleased him. So Saul said,
I will give her to him that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him.
Therefore Saul said to David,
Philistines may be
What?
against him.
Therefore Saul said to So Saul said,
I will give it.
So he's just trying to be like, all right, so now that you've married into the family, we have an understanding here. You're going to do as I say, right? I've given you something. You're going to do as I say. You're going to go fight the Philistines, and you're going to respect our relationship, and you're not going to take over the throne. I think that's probably what Saul is
that she may be
aiming
a snare
for
to
here.
him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him.
Therefore Saul said to David a second time,
You shall be my son-in-law today.
And Saul commanded his servants,
Communicate with David secretly and say, Look, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now, therefore, become the king's son-in-law.
So
we already
Saul's
established
servants
that.
spoke those words in the hearing of David.
Oh, it said, you shall be my son-in-law today. So there's like, okay, do it, become my son-in-law.
And David said,
Does it seem to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing I am a poor and lightly esteemed man?
And the servants of Saul told him,
In this manner David spoke.
Thus you shall say to David, The king does not desire any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies.
Okay, there's your plan,
Saul
Saul.
thought to make
Okay, I see
David
what you're
fall
doing.
by the hand of the Philistines. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Now the days had not expired. Therefore David arose and went, he and his men, and killed 200 men of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full count to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Thus Saul saw
And he doubled it.
and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David.
I bet after that.
So Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war. And so it was, whenever they went out, that David's
literally like
wisely.
Achilles, right? Like in Troy, right? They both the armies send out the one fighter to represent the two lands, and then now right here, similar type of thing.
Whenever they went out, princes of the Philistines went out to war. And so it was, whenever they went out, that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed.
All right, that's it. Chapter 13. I mean, 8. What am I saying? Chapter 18 is done. Tomorrow we'll jump into chapter 19. Let's get a sneak peek of what that is. Saul persecutes David. Let's see what he's going to do to David. Man, he's getting more and more jealous, huh? I mean, he's scared because he knows. It's like if somebody tells you that you're going to die soon, but they don't tell you how or when, or how or by what means and stuff like that. You're going to freak out. You're going to be like looking over your shoulder, thinking about when, how, what's going to happen, right? That's what's happening to David right now, because Samuel told him that you're out as king. We've found another guy, and he's gonna take over as king. So Saul is like paranoid, right? And I mean, in this case, he has a right to be, because David is the guy. He's the guy that's going to take over. So that's going to be it for today. We just read chapter 17 and 18. Tomorrow we're going to jump into 19. And I'll see you guys then, all right? Take care. Goodbye.